Victims of domestic violence were honored tonight by the House of Ruth in Dothan. Family, friends, and members of the community gathered at the Angel of Hope statue at Westgate Park. A candlelight vigil paid tribute to 4 victims in our area who have lost their lives since October of last year. And survivors of domestic violence told their stories. It was a night of remembrance that's also serving as a reminder that help is out there. The House of Ruth provides a safe haven for battered women and children, serving 9 different counties in southeast Alabama with a 27-bed shelter and providing legal advocacy, counseling, and a 24-hour crisis hotline.
So tonight really means awareness and bringing light to what's really happening in the shadows and letting people see, and then honoring those that we've lost and doing our best to have no more losses in the future.
With tonight's candlelit vigil, the House of Ruth is ensuring the light and memory of the victims will not be forgotten.